we are the only, all living beings that we're aware of, all living creatures have some form of sleep, but we are the only living creatures that will voluntarily deprive themselves of sleep. And which is really, really incredible, really, when you think about it. Depriving someone of sleep, it used to be a form of torture. It's now forbidden by international law, but yet millions upon millions of people do it to themselves voluntarily every week.
Hello and welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle, and our guest today is Dr. Eidn. And I am so excited about having him here today. We are going to talk about sleep and the importance of sleep. And I'll real quickly read his biography because it's really interesting. So Dr. Eidn is a sleep practitioner and general medical practitioner with over 20 years of clinical experience. He has personally suffered from every kind of sleep problem there is to have, so he has a real understanding of what it's like to live with poor sleep. Whether it's related to stress, chronic pain, medications, or mental health, he's been through them all. And so he is uniquely paced to connect on a deeper level with people to help them through their sleep difficulties. He's now deeply passionate about the science of sleep and the almost limitless benefits it can bring to our health and well-being. So thank you, Dr. Eidn, for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to come.
So tell us about your sleep journey. So you're a general practitioner, and I know you have a story behind how you got into the whole sleep disorders and all of that.
Yeah. So here in the UK, there isn't a specific medical training to become a sleep specialist. You go into some other area first, and then you develop an interest in sleep. And my interest in sleep really kind of, I guess it started when I was a teenager, probably.
Mm,
It's really been a long-standing thing because I've always been extremely aware of how my own sleep affects how I feel and how I perform.
mm.
And probably the earliest kind of memories of it are that I did a paper round as a teenager for quite a few
Wow.
years, and I would have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:30, to get to the newsagent to pick up all the newspapers and go deliver them. And I never got used to it. I did it probably for 3 years, I think, and I never got used to it. I would fall asleep in class. I'd feel awful.
Mm,
And I think that's really when I really started to understand how important sleep is for me, for how I feel. And I
right.
always really kind of maintained that interest. And it was kind of, when I then became a junior doctor, or as you guys call it, the resident doctor,
Mm-hmm.
doing the night shifts on the hospital wards,
Wow.
really kind of really kind of took it out of me back then. I mean, it's not the same now, thank goodness, but back then we would do a full 7 nights in a row. So you basically would lose a week of your life to night shifts. And again, it was something I just never got used to. So my interest in sleep just grew and grew. And really in the last kind of 10 to 15 years, the sleep science has really kind of entered a really kind of interesting phase and has really taken off. And so I kind of developed my interest hand in hand with that as I became a GP, a family doctor, a general practitioner, we called them in the UK. I also developed my interest in sleep, and I then went on to set up a private online service called the Sleep Project, which myself, another GP, and a pediatric sleep nurse have set up
Mm,
together. And our mission really is to try and improve the lives of as many people as we can through bringing them better sleep, either helping them with sleep disorders or through educating people about how to get better sleep, through educating healthcare professionals as well,
mm-hmm.
because unfortunately, sleep just really isn't a part of the medical curriculum
Mm-hmm.
worldwide, really. There was a study done on this a few years ago, and the average amount of time spent on teaching about sleep in a 5-year medical course was an hour in 5 years, which is really staggering considering that we spend a third of our life sleeping.
Yeah.
So So yeah, that's a little bit about the work that we do at the Sleep Project, really trying to kind of bring this fairly new and certainly um, evolving science to
Hmm.
as many people as we can, to improve their well-being through the power of sleep.
I know it to be true in my life. I didn't understand or appreciate sleep until actually I got older, and I just, but it was in my younger adult years that I recognized, for instance, you have a work week and you work regular hours. So you go to bed at a regular time. And then here's the weekend. Oh, I can stay up until 11, 12 o'clock at night and sleep
Mhm.
in. And then Monday morning, I would feel horrible and it would take me a while. And I finally got really tired of that and recognized what I was doing and realized, no, I need to keep my sleep consistent, whether it's the weekend or the weekday. And I'm on that. But it's so true that even us that aren't doctors, I mean, we do take sleep for granted. We don't take it as serious as we should. And I take it, and I know you'll clarify this even more, is my time of sleep is when my body restores itself. My brain, it's resting. And that's why one thing I've also implemented, and I think you'll probably touch on this too, is I don't eat for 3 or 4 hours before I go to bed because I want my body to rest when I'm sleeping and not digest my food. But I'm sure we'll kind of get into that. But I mean, I think it is just, oh, well, I'm just going to go sleep. And we don't realize the importance of what the sleep does for our body.
Yeah, you're quite right. I think I think that attitudes are changing
Mm-hmm.
gradually, but
Yeah.
we are fighting this kind of long-standing societal belief that sleep is something that's optional or
Right.
isn't as isn't necessary. It isn't that important for our health and well-being, and we're fighting this kind of these kind of this rhetoric of sleep is for the weak or you snooze you lose,
Mm-hmm.
those sorts of attitudes, and it is starting to change. It is changing gradually over time, but that's really part of our mission, really, to try and get that information out there so people do take their sleep seriously.
Mm-hmm.
um, it's incredible, really. We are the only all living beings that we're aware of, all living creatures have some form of sleep, but we are the only living creatures that will voluntarily deprive themselves of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And
Interesting.
which is really incredible, really, when you think about it. Depriving someone of sleep, it used to be a form of torture. It's now forbidden by international law,
Oh,
but
true.
yet millions upon millions of people do it to themselves voluntarily every
Mm-hmm.
week, like
Mm-hmm.
what you were describing. We actually there's a term for that now. What the that kind of lifestyle that you were describing that you had in your early adult years, and we call it social jet lag. This kind of shifting
Mm-hmm.
your body clock sometimes by several hours
Yeah.
just at the weekend. And so you're shifting your body clock a few hours forwards at weekend. You're trying to then shift it back into place during the week for the working week, and your body clock's all over the place. Your sleep quality is really poor. Um, it's a common problem, and it's something that society, I think, hasn't for a long time taken as seriously as it should.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that attitudes are changing, and the opportunity to come on podcasts like this is part of that,
Mm-hmm.
is part of that message, really.
Right, and we're going to get into the whole trauma aspect that us trauma survivors deal with our sleep and the interruptions and the nightmares and stuff. But one of the
Mm.
questions I had is, I've heard, I'm asking for your clarification on this. It feels like we all have a different sleep cycle. Like I'm an early bird. My body does really well if I'm in bed asleep at 9 o'clock and I get up at between 4 and 4:30. I mean, that is ideal for me. Actually, 4:30 would be preferred.
Yeah,
Um, but then some people are like, oh, I'm a night owl, and I feel like I do better. Is that true? Do we have our own built-in
absolutely.
cycles?
Absolutely, 100%. Most people are somewhere in the middle. But yes, it's something called a chronotype. So some people are this early bird or morning larks, we sometimes call them. Their biology, their body clock, their circadian rhythm is one that works on an earlier schedule than somebody who is a night owl. So everything that goes on with your in your 24-hour body clock cycle, your circadian rhythm, the release of hormones, the different kind of your sugar regulation, your blood pressure
Mm.
regulation, it all happens in early birds at an earlier time of day and in night owls at a later time of day. So most people have a kind of, somewhere in the middle, but
Mhm.
there are people who have an extremely early body clock, this kind of extreme morning lark type people, and there are people who have an extremely late one, the extreme kind of night owls. And your chronotype, your body clock, is something that's set genetically. It's
Mm.
you
Okay.
inherit it from your parents. So most people who are early types will have at least one parent who was similar, and the
Mhm.
same for night owls. And what's really important is to get the best quality sleep and for the best kind of long-term health and well-being is trying to live your life in sync with your own body's natural circadian rhythm. That's the ideal way to do it. That's not always possible,
Right.
especially for night owls, because the society, the world expects them to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to get to work or to get into school, and
Right.
so that can cause a lot of problems. And that's one of the reasons why people who are, especially extreme night owls, have higher rates of mental health problems and higher rates
Ooh.
of um, employment problems, and don't do as well at school in general. Not all of them, but
Right.
when you look at them compared to morning types, there is a difference, and it's because society really has been designed for morning types by morning types.
True.
And so, yeah, it's absolutely a real thing. It's it's set by your biology. You can it does change as the age through your life.
Mhm.
So babies don't really have that circadian rhythm. That's why the newborn babies are awake at all hours of all hours of the night and day. Um, when you, as a child, it tends to be kind of early. When you go into teenage years, your circadian rhythm shifts later and later, and so this kind of, this stereotype of teenagers going to bed late and wanting to sleep in until midday, they're not being lazy. That is how their biology
Yeah.
pre-programs them. The kind of your circadian rhythm tends to kind of shift back to fairly normal times in early adulthood, and then as you get older and older, it tends to creep earlier and earlier. So
Mhm.
lots of kind of people in their elderly folk will enjoy going to bed earlier and getting up earlier.
Right.
So it's very much based on your biology and genetically programmed. You can do things to shift your body clock,
Mm.
particularly in terms of exposing yourself to bright light, which, I mean, we could do a whole podcast episode just on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But if you have a genetic tendency to be an early bird, you will naturally always kind of slip back towards being an early bird, even if you artificially shift your body clock. And the same for night owls. You'll have a tendency to slip back into that biological rhythm over time.
I'm glad you clarified that because I've actually had friends who are night owls, and they they say to me like it's a bad thing or that they're guilty of being a night owl. And I used to always say to them, it's not right or wrong, it's what your body does. And I'm glad you clarified that because some of us can be real hard on ourselves for, I get a lot of, ooh, you get up that early, and it's like I
Yeah.
love the morning. I
I,
love it.
yeah, I'm glad you can see it that way, because a lot of people don't. For the
Yeah.
for the morning types, um, they don't tend to, I guess, get criticised quite as much. But for the
No.
night owls,
Mhm.
people who don't want to wake up until 10, 11, midday, society calls them lazy,
Yep.
and that isn't the case. It's their biology, and so this is something that it's not surprising that people who are extreme night owls are more likely to have self-esteem issues, and more likely to
Mm.
have difficulty with employment, and more likely to
Mhm.
end up with mental health difficulties. So yeah, it's a I think it's going to be a work in progress, that change,
Hmm.
shifting attitudes in society. But we've managed to, over 20 years, shift attitudes about other things, mental health being one,
Yes.
trauma being another, I think.
Yeah,
And so
definitely.
hopefully we'll keep chipping away, and hopefully we'll move the conversation forward.
Hey, thank you for listening so far. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to subscribe so you won't ever miss an episode. Exactly. Yeah. And really, having proper sleep and resting is such a, it's really important for your self-care. And so many of us survivors, one of the first things that goes out the window is our self-care. And so
Yeah,
that's why I thought it was really important to have you on, and I'll ask you some questions about the whole trauma experience and sleep,
yeah,
but it's really important that the listeners understand that you need the rest in order to heal. That is a big component that we need in order to heal. We need to rest our bodies and our minds. And so that's the biggest reason why I wanted to have you on, is just help people understand the importance of sleep in general, but especially for those of us that struggle with it, because some of us can't sleep, some of us can sleep and then wake up, and some of us had
yeah,
nightmares.
yeah. No, no, absolutely. The we so traditionally, people might describe the kind of the pillars of good health as being um, nutrition, sleep, exercise. We don't see sleep as one of the pillars of good health. We see sleep as the foundation
Ooh,
upon which good health and well-being is built. If you're not sleeping, all the other things go out the window. We know that people who don't sleep, are not sleeping well at least, they don't eat healthily. You
no.
have shifts in your hormones that make you crave unhealthy foods and that make you end up putting on weight. We know that people who are not sleeping well don't end up doing the exercise that they know they should, because it affects your motivation, it affects your willpower. So we really see it as the bedrock, as the foundation of all well-being and health, really.
I agree. I 100% agree. And I'll just share real quick a story, an experience that I had. I had to have neck surgery, and until I had the neck surgery, you can see the scar I have on my neck, but
Absolutely.
I was in excruciating pain all the time. I mean, just to even cut vegetables was incredibly painful, and I refused to take pain medicine. I was so scared of pain medicines. So I would take Tylenol and Motrin and try to get through. But at night, if I was lucky if I got 3 hours of sleep at night, and I was working a full-time job, I can't tell you how hard it was.
Mm,
I would stumble into work just, with very little sleep and a lot of pain.
yeah.
The Motrin would take a little bit of the edge off. And then I would literally take my lunch hour and go down to my car and sleep for like 25 minutes, and it would help. It would take the edge off so that I could get through the rest of the day. But what it did to me mentally, of not being able to sleep and realizing that I'm only going to maybe have 3 hours of sleep tonight. And when I would wake up and I would be frustrated and I would be exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. I cannot tell you mentally how much that affected me. And when it was time for the surgery, I was begging them to put me out because I just wanted to sleep. It was awful.
Yeah, it affects everything. It affects everything. It affects our perception of pain and how well we can
Yes.
tolerate pain. It affects our mental health. Some of you listeners might have heard of or read a book that was very popular a few years ago, called "Why We Sleep." It was written by a Stanford sleep scientist named Matthew Walker. He's British actually, but he's sorry, not Stanford, Berkeley. A very famous book, and Matthew, he's really good at kind of the language that he explains things in is fantastic. And one of the kind of analogies that he uses is that poor sleep is a bit like a burst water mains pipe in your house, and that if that pipe is burst, eventually the water leak is going to find its way into every room, into every nook and cranny of your house. And sleep is exactly the same. There is
Hmm.
really no bodily system, no bodily functions that we know of that are not affected by poor sleep. Sooner or later, it affects everything if you're not sleeping well. It affects your mental health, it affects your pain perception, it affects your glucose metabolism, it affects your blood pressure, it affects your muscle healing, it affects literally everything you can think of
Hmm.
sooner or later. So So it's doubly important to give sleep the attention it deserves, to prioritize sleep properly, to develop good sleep habits, not to overthink sleep. There's a danger there too. If you
Yeah.
become too obsessive about sleep, it can work against you and it can make sleep more difficult. But if
Hmm.
you give it the space it deserves and the respect it deserves, and develop really good sleep habits, then you're then giving yourself the best opportunity for all of your kind of bodily functions and all of your bodily systems to work at their optimum level.
So I'll ask you. I've got some questions here that are specific for the trauma. I've sent them to you, and I think they're really good, and I think they'll really
Yeah.
help the audience. But help me remember at the end, though, for you to share with us some sleep habits that our listeners can take away that they can maybe start tonight to help them sleep better.
Yeah.
Um, but the first question is, can you explain how the nervous system plays a role in sleep and how we can regulate it before bedtime? So that's maybe kind of along the same lines of what I was just
Yeah.
saying, but
Yeah. Yeah. So the nervous system is perhaps the most important thing to really pay attention to when we are trying to optimize our sleep. And it's obviously something that I'm sure you've discussed on your podcast before, because it's something very kind of relevant to people who have experienced trauma in their lives. And we have kind of two main branches to our nervous system. We have the fight or flight branch, which is known as the sympathetic nervous system. It's a ridiculous name for it because there's nothing really sympathetic about it at all.
yeah.
But that's our kind of fight or flight activated danger sensing branch of our nervous system. We then have the other opposite half, the complementary half, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is sometimes known as the rest and digest branch of the
Hmm.
nervous system. And unfortunately, people who have been through trauma have a hyper vigilant sympathetic nervous system. That fight or flight reaction
Yes.
is always there or thereabouts. It's always on edge. It's always looking for danger and looking for threats. And unfortunately, that is what inhibits sleep. So
Mm.
it's in order for us to be able to fall asleep and to stay asleep, we need to really dial back the activity of the sympathetic nervous system. We really need to dampen down that fight or flight response. And we need to nurture and ramp up the parasympathetic, the rest and digest response. So sometimes this can be easier said than done, but there are a number of strategies that people can employ in order to try and improve that. One of them, I think, is having a really good and consistent nighttime routine.
Hmm.
We all, anyone who's a parent knows about the importance of a bedtime routine for children that helps them to kind of wind down and to kind of get ready for sleep. And it's just as important for adults, really,
Hmm.
and particularly so in somebody who has experienced trauma or is going through a stressful time currently, because they will have an overactive, a hyper vigilant, and a hyper acute fight or flight response.
Yep.
And part of that is because of threat, because our fight or flight response is designed to protect us from threats. And the way that we can kind of dial that down and dampen that down a little bit is through really nurturing the opposite of threat, which is familiarity. If we if we
Mm.
teach our brains that every night before we go to bed we do these three, four, five things in usually in this order, whatever that might be. It might be dimming the lights an hour before it's bedtime. It might be then having a nice long soak in the bath. It might be doing some reading before you go to bed. But having anything that your brain can then start to recognize as familiar.
Hmm.
This is, I do this every night and I do this before I go to bed. This will help to reduce that kind of that kind of threat detection
Mm-hmm.
alertness that we have, and will help to nurture that parasympathetic response. So having a routine is really, really important. There are then a whole host of techniques that people can employ that will help to reduce that sympathetic response, reduce the fight or flight response, and to promote the parasympathetic response. Things like breath work,
Yeah.
things like meditation, mindfulness. There's a body
Mm-hmm.
scan technique along those lines, progressive muscle relaxation. There's a whole host of different kind of techniques out there that can be really helpful. A lot of them work through breathing, through
Mm-hmm.
by helping you to manipulate your breath in order to reduce your parasympathetic response. To reduce your sympathetic response and to calm things down. So those would be the kind of two key things that I think will be helpful for somebody to regulate their nervous system to help them sleep.
Oh, those are great starts. Just the routine makes sense because you're telling your brain you're getting ready every night. Now we're winding down and we're getting ready to go to sleep.
Yeah.
I love that. And that's what
Well,
I do. I
well,
absolutely have a routine, and there's certain things that I don't do before bed. I don't get on my phone. I don't get on my tablet. I don't,
yeah.
there's things that I just don't do because I know that I need to tell myself it's time to wind
Yeah.
down.
It's so important. There's so many people out there who, because they don't necessarily kind of think about it, overthink it too much. They'll come home from a long day at work, and then they'll make dinner for the kids, and then they'll chuck the kids in the
Mm-hmm.
bath, and then they'll fight the kids into the pajamas and get them to sleep. And then when they've done that, they'll take half an hour for themselves to watch something on Netflix, and then it's kind of bedtime, and they're still in the you know bright glaring artificial lights, and then they
Yes.
think, oh, before bed I better just check my work emails and make sure nothing's coming in, and then oh god, I've just remembered I've got to do that tomorrow, or somebody sent them a reply that they didn't like the wording or the tone of it, and then
You're
they're on
off.
edge and they're all fired up again, and it's the worst thing that you can do really for sleep. So it
Yeah.
is having a consistent routine is really important.
Yeah, my husband's funny because he'll be really careful about doing things like that because he goes, I don't want to get my second wind. He'll get a second wind and then he's
Yeah,
awake and then he's like, okay, now I can't go to sleep. He calls it a
yeah,
second wind. So he's really careful about that too, of not running into the office and checking that email one more time. Yeah, he's
yeah.
really
it's
good about
it's
that.
tempting, it's tempting, but
It is.
you gotta you gotta force yourself, and then once you've kind of made it part of your routine, then it's much easier to keep it up.
Yes.
Once you've got used to doing it that way, sometimes you just need to kind of really motivate yourself to do it the first few times, and then it becomes second nature.
Yeah, and then when your sleep is really good, you don't want to ruin that. So you'll
Exactly.
stick with your routine for sure. Okay, well that was a great answer and it's something I do. So I'm really glad I do that. So what role does deep sleep play in emotional healing and how can trauma survivors increase their chances I guess it's chances of getting restorative sleep? Not changes, but chances.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so it's interesting, really. I think there's a bit of a preamble to this question before I answer it properly.
Okay.
It's interesting, really. In the last, I don't know, 5 years, we've started talking a lot more about sleep stages. It's been a lot more out
Yes.
there in the kind of public conversation about deep sleep and about REM sleep. And I guess a lot of this comes from, well, one, that people are better educated, you know, people getting that science into the kind of public domain in a way that's understandable is easier than it's ever been through things like this.
True.
There's lots of really great science communicators out there, but also there's no question that wearable technology, I think, has contributed to this a lot. We get a
Mhm.
lot of people obsessing over what their percentage of deep sleep is and what their percentage of REM sleep is.
Yes.
And I think the first thing to say about that is that wearable technology is not bad at telling you whether you are awake or asleep. It's reasonably good at that. It's reasonably good at that. And it can be quite helpful for people to help them to kind of to educate them as to what sorts of things affect their sleep. So I've
Mhm.
lost count of the number of people who've told me that they've realized that even just one alcoholic drink will have a significant knock-on impact on their sleep according to their sleep tracker. So they're pretty good at telling you whether you're awake or you're asleep. But they are absolutely hopeless at telling you whether you are in deep sleep, dream sleep, REM sleep. The stages of sleep, they are pretty
Yeah.
useless at. They're about as reliable as a flip of a coin. So so what I say to anybody who comes to me saying, how can I get more deep sleep or how can I get more REM sleep? The first thing is I always ask them, why are you asking me that question? And the answer is almost always because they've got something wearable that's told them they're not getting enough deep sleep or REM sleep. So to all intents and purposes, we can ignore what our wearable devices tell us about how much REM sleep or deep sleep we're getting. That's the first part of the answer.
I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, your questions about this episode, or really anything that has to do with trauma. So you can comment below, or you can reach out to me at asklisatickle@gmail.com. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you.
To answer your question, what role does deep sleep play in emotional healing? Well, all sleep plays a hugely important role in emotional healing. But it's probably REM sleep that actually plays the greater role for the emotional side of things. This is a kind of really an oversimplification, but if we think about sleep as two types of sleep, you have REM sleep, and then which is when we dream, or mostly when we dream, and the very imaginatively titled non-REM sleep, of which deep sleep is a small part. When you split sleep into those two types of sleep, this is very much an oversimplification, but the non-REM sleep, as which deep sleep is a part, is more perhaps focused on the physical restoration of our body and our brain. That's the time when the toxins are cleared out of the brain, when hormones are released that promote tissue healing. So we can think more about deep sleep as being primarily about the physical repair of the body, and emotional and REM sleep, which is when we dream, is more about the emotional healing and about processing emotions, moods, mental health,
Right.
memory as well. And again, to kind of go back to that book, just because he's great at coming up with analogies, Matthew Walker describes REM sleep as like being an overnight form of therapy. We replay our memories, our dreams are kind of replaying our memories and
Yeah.
processing our emotions to help to assimilate that information with what we already know about the world, which helps, and it helps us to detach the emotion, especially negative emotion, from the memory itself. So we don't forget what happened, but it perhaps feels a little bit less raw to us. So,
Right.
so all sleep is important for emotional healing, without question, without question. But probably of the two, REM sleep is probably the most, is probably slightly more focused on the emotional side of things.
That makes sense.
But what I definitely don't want people to get kind of caught up in and bogged down in is trying to increase one type of sleep or another.
Right.
We don't need to do that. Our bodies will do that automatically. If we run a marathon and have a lot of tissue damage, our brain will automatically prioritize deep sleep and non-REM sleep. So we will get more deep sleep that night to help our body to repair. I'm sure that everyone's listening can relate to if they've had a really kind of emotional day for whatever reason. Maybe something distressing happened. Maybe it was positive emotions. You often will remember your dreams more that night. You'll dream more because your body has got a lot of emotion and a lot of
Yeah.
experience to process, and so it will prioritize REM sleep more, and you'll get more REM sleep. So So the brain's very clever in that way. We
Yeah.
don't need to worry about how much of different types of sleep or different stages of sleep we're getting. What we need to do is to make sure we're prioritizing sleep and to
Mm-hmm.
make sure we are allowing the the best kind of practices to give our brains the best chance to get good restorative sleep. And as long as we're doing that, as long as we're kind of putting in place the things that we have talked about so far and are going to talk
Mm-hmm.
about in the rest of this episode, so things like a routine, things like breath work or whatever to help to regulate your immune system, nervous system, and all the other tips that we're going to talk about. As long as we're putting those things into place, our brain will take care of the rest.
That is so interesting because when I had back surgery, I remember it was a long time before I actually remembered dreaming. And that makes sense because my body was focusing on the physical part as opposed to the emotional part, right?
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
actually concerned about it because I'm like, God, I haven't had a dream in a long time, and then it was like months, and then all of a sudden I woke up. Oh, I had a dream, and because I know the importance of dream, and I understand that that's the REM sleep. I don't understand it obviously to the degree you do, but that makes complete sense.
Yeah, look, it's not that you weren't
Crazy.
dreaming. It's not that you weren't dreaming during that time. Um, Everybody dreams every night. We dream probably on average about 2 hours every night,
Wow.
and usually we remember a very small
Yeah.
proportion of that. So it sounds very likely to me that yes, your body was prioritizing deep sleep in order
Yeah.
to help with tissue repair, but without question, you were getting plenty of REM sleep too. But perhaps if you're getting less, you just don't remember it. And
Yeah.
most people don't remember much or anything about their dreams.
Yeah. 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 I only have a few dreams that are like I can remember so vividly. I could tell you they were in color. I could tell you so much detail. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's our next question. How does unresolved trauma impact sleep patterns, and what are the most common sleep disturbances survivors experience?
So the the two kind of, I guess, the two most common sleep disorders that people with who've been through traumatic experiences will suffer with will be insomnia, which is incredibly common in the general population, but particularly so for anybody who has suffered trauma. And insomnia is all it is a difficulty in falling asleep or difficulty in staying asleep. It's
Yeah.
just a dissatisfaction with your sleep pattern. So
Mm-hmm.
insomnia is incredibly common in the general population anyway, but more so in people who have experienced trauma. Um, the other one, it's not classified as a sleep disorder, but post-traumatic stress disorder, whether that be classic PTSD
Mm-hmm.
that has been described for several decades, or complex PTSD, which is something that the medical world is really kind of starting to get to grips with more
Finally.
recently. A big feature of both of them is sleep related symptoms, so difficulty sleeping, recurrent nightmares. Nightmares themselves are a sleep disorder, so recurrent nightmare disorder is a sleep disorder as well. So those would really be the three common ones that
Mm-hmm.
people who've been through trauma will experience, and they're all very very treatable. That's the important thing. There are millions and millions of people out there who are living with poor sleep and sleep
Mm-hmm.
disorders because they don't think anything can be done about it.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps they've been to see a doctor who wasn't educated properly in sleep, because most of them aren't, even to this day, and aren't aware of some of the treatments. And I don't mean drug treatments here. I mean non medication treatments
Oh,
that
that's
are
wonderful.
really really effective for different sleep disorders. So that's one of the real kind of key messages that I want people to take home, is that if you are living with long-term sleeping problems, even if it's been 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, they are still very, very fixable if you see a sleep specialist. So So I really kind of I really hope that people can come out and speak to somebody about it.
Yeah, yeah. I have a couple friends who actually, one friend, she barely sleeps at night, and she's never gone to a doctor. She's never done anything about it. She just kind of like copes with it, and
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it really, it can destroy people's quality of life. They
Yeah.
really has a profound impact on how they function and what they can do from day to day. And one of the, probably the most common kind of feedback statement we get at the Sleep Project, because we ask everybody, everyone who's been through our kind of programs and things, we ask them for feedback. And probably the single most common feedback statement is, "You have changed my life," because
Oh.
sleep problems are, they really do significantly impair someone's
Mm-hmm.
quality of life,
Mm-hmm.
and they are so treatable and fixable that you can change someone's life. You can transform their life by addressing their sleep problems. So I really do hope that listeners who have suffered with sleep problems for a long time do come forward and seek help from a sleep specialist.
And I hope they recognize that it's a sleep problem, because, like with my friend, she's just done this for so many years. She doesn't see it as she sees it as a problem, but not a problem to go and get it resolved, and
Yeah,
how it affects their life. And so you do it for so long, you don't even realize that, oh, it's a sleep problem, and
yeah,
I need to do something about it, and that it's not good for my body.
yeah, yeah.
What are the common connections between PTSD, nightmares, and insomnia, and how can survivors begin to break that cycle? So we kind of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, so they are separate disorders, separate issues in that they all recognize sleep disorders or mental health disorder in PTSD's case. But there is overlap without question. So people with PTSD often suffer from nightmares and insomnia.
Mm-hmm.
Um, People with nightmares often suffer with insomnia. There's a huge amount of overlap between them, but they are kind of separate entities. There are really effective treatments for all of them. So for PTSD, there are trauma-focused therapies. There are
Yeah.
medications that can be very helpful for it as well.
Mm-hmm.
For nightmares, there is a type of therapy known as imagery rehearsal therapy, which helps the sufferer to change the particularly effective for kind of recurrent nightmares of a similar kind of ilk, and they help the sufferer to rewrite the script of their nightmare.
Oh,
And so you change the narrative. So, and over time
yeah.
you repeat that kind of script to yourself before you go to bed, and eventually it becomes ingrained in your brain. And the idea is that it transfers itself to the nightmare, and you change the narrative to a positive one or a happy ending kind of thing. And that has really effective.
Mm.
Lots of evidence behind the effectiveness for that. And for insomnia, there are drug treatments, but really the first line treatment for everybody with insomnia, or almost everybody with insomnia, should be CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. Now, I think in the sleep world, this needs a bit of a rebrand, because people hear CBT and think, oh well, I've done CBT for anxiety and depression. I know what
Uh-huh.
that is already, or I did it for anxiety and it didn't work, or whatever. And it really isn't anything like CBT for anxiety and depression. It's very much its own thing. It's really a different kettle of fish. The way that we explain it at the Sleep Project is CBTI is very much like a toolbox of techniques and tricks that help you to understand how sleep works and teach you techniques to turn around insomnia and to nip it in the bud in different areas depending on what your particular problem is. And usually, what happens is people don't necessarily take all of the techniques on board. Not every technique fits for every person,
Right.
but they find the one or two or three
Mm-hmm.
techniques that work for them, and they're the ones that they use going forward. And we know that CBTI works for approximately 80% of people with insomnia even if you had it for
Wow.
decades, even if you had it for decades, and as well as being, drug free without the side effects, it
Mm-hmm.
also helps those people to stay insomnia free for years to come, because they've learned the skills and the techniques that they can use to keep their sleep good, and to treat any kind of recurrences of insomnia that happen further down the line. So they all have they're all recognized disorders with their own specific treatments,
Mm-hmm.
and all the treatments have been shown to be really, really effective in studies and trials,
And drug free.
and are drug free. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and
absolutely.
not that there's a place for medication, but I'm always a firm believer that try what you can without medication first, because sometimes it can be just something really simple, and then you don't need to take the medication and all the side effects and everything that affect you.
I
So,
couldn't agree more. There absolutely is a place for medication in this world, but over the last few decades, I think that the focus in medicine has
hmm,
gone too much towards
yeah,
medications
yeah,
and not enough towards some of the lifestyle factors that not only will treat the condition without the need for medication, but will help that person to live a healthier,
hmm,
better life in the long run over the decades to come.
exactly. And you're empowering them, right? You're giving them their
Absolutely.
power back.
Yeah.
They can manage this rather than it managing them.
So
That's what's so
important.
frustrating.
So important. Yeah.
I just remember that was the most frustrating thing for me is I had no way of managing this that I can't sleep. Oh, so frustrating. And you have night after night after night of that, and it just is wearing on you.